Welcome back, my friends. Today we're talking about hubs, brakes, spindles, hats, and rotors. We're going to go from this to this, and I'm going to show you how to measure all of this to get to this point here. This is one of the more common questions I get from people with a picture of a spindle and a hub on it, and a simple quote, "I need NASCAR brakes." Well, NASCAR brakes don't exist, but I'm going to show you what does and what's going on our Supra today. So let's get started. Today we're going to dive into what all of these components are and how they assemble into this unit right here. On my right, your left, we've got brake hats. They come in a multitude and infinite number of sizes, offsets, and styles. We have brake brackets in the front. They hold the caliper to the spindle with the lugs right here. We've also got tie rods and control arms. They're going to help us put the front end of our car together. These are aluminum. These are hat spacers. They space the hat off of the front hub. These are not, I repeat this, these are not wheel spacers. These are SFI rated steel wheel spacers. That's the only thing you should be using is an SFI steel spacer. We have our dust covers. We're going to go over a couple different kinds and how they're used. New pads, new rotors, new hubs, and new bearings. This is the old stuff that came off the Supra, and I've used it for mock-up. I'm going to show you how to measure this because when I get a picture of this, I send back probably 8 questions because people have never A, owned a stock car, like a NASCAR series stock car, or ever worked on one, and B, they don't know where to begin measuring or even what they have to start with. So we're going to go over a bunch of that stuff and the differences in a bunch of these components so that you know what you have and how to start measuring what you need. So let's jump into it now. We're going to take all of this stuff over to the bench and we're going to start measuring things out, and I'm going to show you how to get to here. A vast majority of the time, the people that contact me asking about NASCAR brakes and front suspension components send me a picture that look like this. Basically just a front hub mounted to a spindle, no brake mount, no hat, no rotor, nothing attached to it. A lot of them get mad because I send them this picture. The ones that aren't happy, they get mad and curse me back, is what it is. Today, we're going to go over how to mount everything to this and the differences in hubs. Believe it or not, they may all look the same to the naked eye, but these are vastly different. So let's dive into measuring the front hubs first. In front of me, we have 3 NASCAR front hub assemblies. Disregard the fact this one has a tone ring on the bottom of it. This has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about. This was just used for ABS testing on a car we put together. This has nothing to do with the video today. These 3 hubs, these 2 are Speedway Engineering. This is a Timken Race Pack hub. These 3 hubs, believe it or not, may look similar, and being on the car not next to each other, they may look exactly the same. You take a ruler across, they're all the same width, they're all 5 inches wide. That's the total width of the hub from front to back, 5 inches wide, or how tall it would be. It is typically from the face of the wheel to the mounting flange of the dust cap. This is typically 2 inches. That's for a standard. And from the face, from here to the back of the hub, is 3 inches. That's going to be your standard hub. Where a lot of people get confused and a lot of people get mad when I ask them questions back is these 3 hubs are all offset. This is a standard 0 hub. Like I said, 2 inches from the dust cover to the mounting surface. From the mounting surface to the back of the hub is 3 inches. This is a 1/4 offset to the inside. This is a 1/2 offset to the inside. A lot of people don't even realize that they even make those. They also make a positive offset. So this could actually be your middle hub. You could have a 1/4 offset out and a 1/2 offset out. And it's easy to see with a ruler right here. If you look at the front of that, I'll lower the camera some. And you look right across that ruler, you can see the difference in the hubs. And a lot of people don't know this even exists. And like I said, this is your standard. This is your 1/4 offset in. This is your 1/2 inch offset in. This also goes the other way. So this could be your standard plus a 1/4 and plus a 1/2. Why do teams do this? Why do these 3, actually, why do these 5 hubs exist? It all goes back to offset in the front suspension and being able to pull the tires in narrow on super speedway cars. Typically on a super speedway car, you might find 1/2 inch inset hubs on both sides so that the teams can pull the fenders in on top of the tire for better aerodynamics. A lot of people don't know this. Typically, you will see these hubs here typically on your auction show cars, your parade lap cars, your Facebook marketplace, trying to get rid of it cars. These are pretty much a specialty hub. You don't really want these for road racing. They're not really used or needed in that application, but they're out there. And a lot of people get mad at me because they have messaged me saying they need brakes. And I send them something and they put a rotor on here with a hat and it hits the spindle because they have an inset hub and the rotor and the hat are wrong. So that's your very simple difference between hubs. Be sure to measure them. If you got two of them, measure them, make sure they're the same. Some of them, like this one, when we tested with this one, we measured it. It's stamped on the end, inset 1/2 inch. I believe this one, yeah, this one, it's upside down on this one, but you can see where it says inset 250, 1/4 inch. This is standard. So these three, we're going to set these aside because we're not going to use these. These are going to go to the side over here. I'm going to drag them out of the way. And I have a brand new set of hubs. These are brand new standards. I pressed the hubs in this afternoon over at my friend Bobby's place. He's got a shop press. These were new old stock off the shelf from Joe Gibbs Racing. They say JGR and their quality control number right there. I use ARP studs. These have all ARP studs pressed in them. I also have MSI studs. MSI is a stud company. It's actually a part of Chalu Race Parts. I believe his wife is in charge of it now. It's a woman-owned business. So if you're looking for those, that's a good place to start, is Chalu Parts, to find wheel studs. We're going to assemble our hub onto the rotor. We're going to use brand new Timken bearings, brand new seals. We're going to assemble everything, put it together, and get our hub mounted to the spindle first. So here we have our bare spindle. First thing we're going to do is we're going to do a dry run, and we're going to assemble our hub with bearings and a bearing spacer and set the backlash and preload on what our bearing is. So these are cryogenically treated Timken bearings. They've been polished, cleaned, cryogenically treated, put back in a bag, and this is how they come. I got these in match sets, front and rear bearing. So front and a rear bearing. We're going to put those on. We're going to put a hub spacer on. A lot of people don't use a hub spacer. A lot of people put everything together and they crank the living piss out of it and then they back it off a half turn. That might work for Papa's camper trailer, but it's not good for a stock car spindle. We use bearing spacers. They make them for front hubs, rear hubs. Many are made directly by the teams. Some are made by Race City Steel, Race City Machine actually. So it just depends on what kind you want, where they came from. These came from a race team. We're going to do a dry run, assemble all this, set the clearance, then we'll pack the bearings, put the seal in, and assemble everything for good. So let's get started with that. First thing we're going to do is we're going to pull out the actual spiral lock in the back that holds the seal in. This is a safety to keep the seal from blowing out of the back. So we'll just pop this out, and we'll set that to the side. We'll take our actual bearings out of the package. These are Timkens. Believe it or not, these are made right here in Union, South Carolina. There was a Timken bearing plant here in Gaffney, South Carolina, but it recently closed. Now these do have a tight clearance, so we're going to install them first and get them lined up, fit against the hub. We'll put our bearing spacer on. Our bearing spacer actually spaces the bearing between the races. So the rear portion will fit against the bearing race there, and the front portion will sit against the bearing race here, like this, and allow the bearing to spin freely. Now these do need to be adjusted once you set the backlash. When you see this Race City Machine style, there are several different shims and spacers that can go in here between the end and the spacer, and you can set preload that way. So we're going to set these up, install our hub, install the front bearing, and grab our washer, which is right here, and the nut. Like I said, we're not putting any grease in here yet. So the first thing we're going to do is install this. Torque it down. And we'll see what our clearance is. Let's get that lined up just a little bit more. Now I'm going to break out my dial caliper. We'll set it up on the spindle and we'll measure the backlash coming out of the bearing. As you can see with the bearing all the way in, we're at 0, and pushed all the way out, we're at 16 thousandths. That's our bearing clearance as needed on the package. So that's what we're going to go with. That's where it's torqued at. The actual center bearing crush sleeve is correct. So now we're going to take this apart, grease it, put the seal in it, put the snap ring on the back of it, assemble it onto the hub, and lock it down. We'll disassemble this. We'll drop the bearings into the pan. We will pack the bearings. I personally prefer the mobile line of grease, XHP 222. That's extreme high pressure. This grease is a bluish purple color, depending on what sunlight you look at it in. There are a dozen different grease manufacturers out there that different teams use. Red, purple, blue. I've seen a green. There's like an opaque white. It's all preference, really. Mobil 1 is a Toyota technology partner. I get a lot of this stuff for free from race teams that I do business with and that I work with, and I use Mobil 1 products on all my Toyotas. So this is what we're going to use in our front hub bearings today. There are a lot of people that use pneumatic packers and all this fancy stuff they have these days. I don't care for it myself. I like doing it by hand and making sure that the grease gets into every crevice. Turn the bearing cage, make sure the grease is in the bearing cage, make sure it's moving in the bearing cage. Does it make a big mess? Absolutely. Do I care? No, not at all, because I'll clean every single bit of it up myself. Now, when it comes to grease, there are a few other factors that a lot of people don't pay attention to, and that is how much is used. I've seen these front hubs packed with, I kid you not, a full tube of grease. They do not need it. It's not warranted. I don't know why people do it, but they do. We're going to hang that on there. We're going to take a lot of this grease and we're going to put it on the inside of our hub where our bearing race is. And then we're going to put some grease down on the inside of the hub. Many people assemble their car and they forget about this kind of stuff. After almost every single track day, I pull the front suspension apart. Well, not exactly front suspension, but I do pull the rotors off. I measure the rotors, brake pad wear, nut and bolt, and check and make sure nothing is coming apart or failing. Up next, our bearing sleeve is going to go inside the hub. We're going to drop it in there. Our bearing's going to go in. And then we're going to pack our front bearing. Get a little more grease. Pack our front bearing. Now another thing to think about as well, this particular hub uses a Timken 2691 front bearing and an HB style rear bearing. Your hubs and your bearing races may be completely different. Some of the older rear steer stuff, it's a much smaller pin on both ends. The more current stuff, there's almost a 2 1/4 inch bearing on the rear. It's humongous. It looks like a rear wheel bearing on the front, but they work and they're good pieces. So what we're going to do is we're going to pack this one good, make sure it spins. Get more grease in the cage, wrap it around the edges. I also have grease retainers for these. If you guys have never seen those before, I will show you what those look like. I got the gloves off. What we're going to do now is we're going to put our rear seal in. We're going to put our safety snap ring on. We're going to mount it to the spindle, put our front bearing in, put our washer and nut on it. Now there are also multiple types of seals that you can use. Most people go with your standard Chicago rawhide type seal. It's a metal seal on both sides, flimsy little rubber piece here. It works. It does the job. It's kind of old school technology. You'll see some of these that have a spring in them. I don't like the ones with the spring. The spring can roll here. Me personally, I like the Garlock seal. I think the Garlock seal is the best seal that's out there. Reason being, on the inside of the seal, there are little metal fingers. Those little metal fingers help hold the seal rubber against the spindle, keep the seal from blowing out, wearing out, and actually throwing grease outside your rear end housing. So we're going to use Garlock seals on both front hubs. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to wipe this down. Get all the grease from the outer edge. And then we are going to install our seal. Unfortunately, Mr. GoPro decided to die while I was finishing the assembly on our hub here. Up next, what we're going to do is we're going to install our grease retainer. That's what this is. It actually cups the bearing. I'll show you in a way that this works. This actually cups the bearing like that, and it keeps the grease inside the bearing cage. If you run them like this and you go through the corner, as the grease gets hot, it can become loose, and the rotational force and the centrifugal force of your vehicle will throw all of that grease out into the cap, your dust cover cap. That's not good. These are grease retainers. They go on the inside, and they keep the grease within the wheel bearing itself. They keep it from flying out, making a mess of your dust cover and leaking all around the edge. We're going to get in dust covers in a second. So this goes in, simply slides in, seats against the bearing, and then if you look at the back of our dust cap, there's a lip on the back of the dust cap. That helps keep that grease retainer in place. Today, we're going to install this dust cap. This is not a race dust cap. This is not a dust cap that I would keep on my car to run it for track days. It has a steel insert. You can see where it's put in and pressed in the back. That steel insert allows you to mount your caster camber gauge to the dust cover. Instead of having this exposed to the elements, sticking a gauge on and off of it, you can stick your magnetic end of your caster camber gauge on the dust cover and hold it in place. There's also, to help keep this from slinging grease all over the place, there's a gasket. It's a little metal machine gasket, goes on the back of the dust cover and mounts between the two. This is not going on today either. We're going to set this aside. When we go to final assemble this after setup, when these get pulled off and put back in the parts bin, we'll put our finished dust cover on here that we're actually going to race with. So for now, we're just going to stick this one on. Another thing to think about too, these can also come in 1032 and 1024 spline. Some of these hubs may be fine thread, some of them may be coarse thread, something else to think about. Another thing to think about as well is the length and depth of them. As you can see on this front dust cover, you have a very shallow well. So the screw slides in. Your retaining screw will slide in like so. And you have that much screw trying to thread into a hole that's not that deep within the actual spindle, because they also make ones like this one, this Hutcherson Pagan. When this one's installed, you only got that much thread sticking out of the back. So it's something to look into and think about. These come in every single shape and size. Stock Car Products, SRI, BSR Hutch, Hutcherson Pagan. These are fronts. This is a front as well, but these can also be used on the rear. Ones like this, they have the 3-bolt design. This is a Harvick rear drive plate. This came off a Harvick truck I had. This will mount to that, just like that for the rear. You can bolt that onto the rear drive plate, like this, and that is your rear setup. Teams did this to help with pit stops. As long as this is though, a lot of teams cut down and went to shorter ones. If you notice in this one, the back of it is machined for 3 bolts because those 3 bolts would actually hold your drive plate, flange, and your cap to it. The O-ring on the inside would seal the axle there, keep the grease from getting out. Then you had 3 holes there that would go on. You would line it up, and that would be your rear drive plate setup. That helps with pit stops. Rear drive plates, you can also put seals in it. This comes from Seals It, and there's the ring on the back. These are made in several different sizes and styles as well. This is a lightweight quartermaster. This one is made by That one is made by Speedway Engineering. So you can get those in several sizes and styles as well as material. This one's for the rear as well. Same thing, bolts on just like that. Lightweight, super hollow, helps cool it as well. This one's made out of titanium. So like I said, there are different sizes, styles, and types available. Just depends on what you want. So let's get this wrapped up, and then we're gonna start talking about putting brake rotors and hats on this thing. So here's the front hub and spindle assembly for my track day Supra. This is not some bait and switch YouTube channel. I'm building this, you're seeing it, and this is what I'm using. It's got low friction Timken bearings in it. It's a brand new hub that came from Gibbs. These studs, I bought at an auction. They were used, but they are in great shape, and I've cleaned them up and checked them. The spindle itself came from Joe Gibbs. It's a NASCAR Nationwide Series spindle. Standard height, 1-inch drop on the pin, standard arm. This is what's going in my track day Supra. I'm not going with any crazy exotic drop caster, 1-inch short, 2-inch drop arm, none of this crazy stuff that you see teams run. This car is going to be used for my personal track day car and to do TV commercials. Everything that's going on here is going on here and being built race tight. I'm explaining to you how to put it together for your car, or just general knowledge on how these things are assembled. One of my favorite shows to watch is How It's Made, and I hope these videos give you a sense of how things are put together on stock cars. Now, you may do things different. Your car may be set up different. I'm not telling you it's right or wrong, and I'm not telling you my way is better than any other. From my experience and all the cars that I built, front suspension I've done, this is what I found to be the best for my application. Up next, we're going to talk about brake hats and rotors, and we're going to get one mounted on here. So let's dive into that. So as you can see, this is both of our completed hub assemblies mounted to our spindles. This one I've got a rotor hat sitting on, and we're going to go into rotor hats now and the differences between all of them and their brands and how they fit on the actual hub themselves. So let's slide these out of the way. Now this is just a small array of several rotor hats that are available. The rotor hat and rotor combination possibilities are endless. And this is where a lot of people get kind of frustrated, simply because the way that the rotor hat actually mounts to the rotor can vary for every single brand. These are Brembo. That's what we're going to use on our front hubs. These are AP. These are Alcon. These are Performance Friction. These are Raybestos Alcon. And as you can see, the mounting preference for every company is just a little bit different. We'll move these out of the way. This is an old rear rotor. The only thing good about this one is the actual bobbins and the hat. The rotor itself is tracked, but this is a rear rotor. As you can see, it's bolted through the back with a bobbin and a washer so that the hat floats. The hat should always be loose from the rotor and float. You don't want it to lock in place because of the heat expansion of the rotor and the hat. It will cause this to break. This particular one, I believe this is a, let's see here, this is a Performance Friction 508-2. So this is a rear, and they use T-bolts in them. Same thing goes for the Raybestos Alcon. The bobbins for this particular type are, let's see, I probably got 2,000 bobbins. So the particular rotor bobbin type for this one would look like this. Would be a T-style bobbin. Looks like this. Some of them have the stud made into them, and they fit into that particular slot on the rotor hat. They bolt through, and this causes the rotor hat to float. That's what the chatter is that you hear. And like I said, every brand has their own way of mounting it. There are also different size bobbins depending on the rotor and the manufacturer. This is a Performance Friction front hat. You notice there's multiple holes around this. As you see on this rotor, there are bolt holes in the back. Well, the Performance Friction rotor, there are no bolt holes in the rotor because they use a tie bar. This would bolt across here with 2 bolts. Something like this. With 2 nuts on it. And a rotor tang would come in this way and stick into about here. And you'd have 12 of those around the edge of the rotor, and it would float on that. we're going to be using Brembo front hats and rotors. This is a rear rotor. As you can see, there is a definite difference in the two. This is a front rotor. We're not going to be using this. As you can see, it's got a giant score on the back of it. I'm building this car for myself as a track day car, and I'm using as many possible new parts as I can. So we're going with new Brembo rotors. But as you can see here, this has an 8-inch center. This here has a 9 1/4. You can also see the thickness in the pad surface area from a front to rear rotor. The rear rotors are always the larger circumference. They always go on the back. You can see that in the hats as well. This is a performance friction rear hat, and you can see the difference in the front hat. If you take them and you can lay them over, you can see the front hat virtually fits inside of there because you can put a larger rotor on the front. We'll pull these out of the way and we'll look at a few different rotors. So as I said, this is what's going on our car. This is an 1 3/8, 12 7/8 in diameter. They call them a 13 in the catalog, but it actually measures at 12 7/8. I'm sure when it heats up and expands, it's a 13. Now I've got this on here for mock-up with some bobbins because I'm going to use this hat on our Supra. Both of these hats are Brembos. They just need to be cleaned up and they're good to go. But let me grab 2 more rotors. We'll move this out of the way for the time being. And we're going to go into rotors. This is a big boy AP short track front rotor. Some people like to run these on the road courses because they are 1 5/8 thick. You're not going to get anything much bigger than that. If we were going to run this car 500 miles at Martinsville, I would be putting these on the front, but we're not. It is excessive rotational weight and unsprung weight on the front end. For me to run these on the front of our car, I don't plan on turning more than 30, maybe 40 minutes of track time at a time with brake blowers on the front. So we're going to run a new Brembo rotor. So let's move this out of the way. And this is my new Brembo rotor. Now, many of you are looking at it probably thinking to yourself, it looks used, but it's not. All the markings you see on here that come off in the dust, that's because this is a new rotor that's already been burnished. What does that mean? That means this rotor has already been broken in. They put it on a rotor dyno that actually has tangs that mount to the rotor, and they hit it with a set of pads to heat the rotor up and bed it. It's called burnishing the rotor. The pads, brand new pads, also come the same way. They have a sacrificial rotor. They take it, they clamp the pads to it for about 40 seconds, get them nice and hot, burn them in, and let them cool down. These are brand new. I just bought these. They list for about $8.20 a piece. I got these from my friend Charles Lewandowski at Chalu Race Parts. These set me back right around $750 for a pair. Depending on the size you want and what you need, you have to actually measure your hat and your rotor on your spindle and check the clearance first. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to bolt this to a hat, clean them all up, and we're going to get them mounted on our spindles permanently. Let's do that. Up next, we're going to install our new front rotors on our hats. First thing I want to talk to you about is thread locker. Not all thread lockers are created the same. This is Permatex thread locker red. Comes in several different colors: red, blue, purple, green, and I think an orange. I used the red high temp on the front because the only thing holding this rotor on are some 1032 bolts and these bobbins. High temp, as you can see right there on the label, it says high temperature, is a lot more suitable for this application depending on how hard you drive your car and how much brake temp you put into the rotors and hat. You definitely want to use this over the standard stuff. I've never had a problem with this failing. These bolts in the front Brembo here, these do not call for safety wire. Some do, some come with the hardware already pre-drilled. We're not going that route. I've never had this fail. I've always used this and it's never been a problem. So we're going to install our rotor hat onto our new rotor. We're going to dive into that, and it simply mounts to the face. And like I said, there are different heights and offsets of these rotor hats. I'll show you how to measure one of these once we get all these mounted and stuck on the front. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the new hardware. I'm going to prop it up right here. I think I will use this. We'll prop it up and we'll start getting this thing assembled. It's not that hard. The bobbins on this particular hat They are keyed, so if you look at the head of the bobbin, it's got a little bit of a half moon in it. That half moon shape locks itself against the face of the bobbin, just like that. So we're going to put all those in, and then we're going to sit it on the hat. We're going to sit the hat on the rotor, actually. And then we'll start bolting our hardware together. Now, if you are looking for parts and pieces like this, where you have a specific part that you're looking for, you can contact Pro Systems in Mooresville. They sell all sorts of different brake components, everything you could use for your braking system. Or you can contact Chalu, who is Charles Lewandowski, that's short for his name. And he is a Brembo brake dealer, and he's out by the drag strip. And we're going to start putting these together, and I'll throw some thread locker on them, and we will run them down. A lot of stuff that I buy also, you can find a lot of good new old stock stuff. If you contact Brian Rogers at Circle Track Warehouse, he's got a ton of stuff too. I have quite a bit in inventory myself, but lately, as the part supplies have began to dwindle, I've held on to a lot of it. Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, that makes 12. So we've got 12. What we're going to do now is we're going to stand this up, and then we're going to put thread locker on the bolts, and then we're going to install them from the back. We have our 1032 fine thread, it comes with a hardened washer, and that's going to go into the back of our rotor and hold the entire assembly together. Tell me I'm out already. Now this is a bit of a tedious part right here. But I get them all started, I run them down, and depending on what you're using and what the manufacturer says, torque specs for every single one of these is just a little bit different, as well as the pattern. I honestly don't think that the pattern is as big a deal as it is getting the actual thread locker on here and getting it torqued. Up next, I'm just going to snug them down, and then we'll break out the torque wrench. With the hardware nice and snug, the rotor hat should still move on the rotor. Like I said, this should never permanently be locked to the rotor. It should always have room for expansion and room to move. The difference between the two metals will allow this to expand freely, but just make sure you don't securely bolt it. It will break the rotor, it'll break the hat, it'll cause the rotor to come apart. A lot of times when you see brake failures on race day, when they say a rotor came apart and exploded on the car, a lot of it has to do with the simple fact that the rotor has expanded more than the hat has, and it's caused an interference and it's come apart. So what I'm going to do now is sit this one aside, assemble the next one, and then we'll torque them both. 10, 11, 12. So that is both rotors and hats assembled with thread locker and torqued to spec. I'm going to wipe them down with some brake cleaner real quick, and then we're going to mount it to our spindle and our hub, and then we're going to go into setting the caliper bracket and the caliper onto the spindle. So let's start with that. Then we're going to bolt our rotor and our hat assembly to our spindle. We're going to use 2 1/4-28 bolts to hold the rotor hat to the spindle and get everything mounted up. Reason being is once this is mounted, I'm actually going to put a wheel spacer on the outside of this. We'll get into that once we mock up our brake caliper and get everything fit. Now this hardware's gone in here just for mock-up. It's to ensure that our rotor hat is set flush against the hub, and when we turn it, everything is true. If you look at it, you'll see the rotor wobbling. There's not a bunch of run out in the rotor and everything. Everything turns smooth. That little bit of clicking you hear, that's the rotor loose on the hat. It should do that. Something else that I have seen 100 million times, and for the life of me, I can't seem to figure it out because there's plenty of information about it out there. Rotors installed on the wrong side, or 2 of the same rotors installed on a car. There are left and right rotors, okay? When you look at the back of this, you see the vanes in the rotor. The vanes in this rotor, think of it as a squirrel cage fan, okay? What they do is they suck cool air in through the back to keep the hub cool. They pull it in and they push it out the vane. So as it's spinning forward, the curved vanes in the rotor are this way. So as it's spinning this way, it is scooping air from the inside and throwing it out. In some applications, especially like Martinsville and Bristol, you will see a stainless steel brake band that goes on the back of here that allows the heat to hit this stainless steel shield and go out of the tire. It's something that has helped prevent melting the beads on tires. But the most important thing to remember is you need to keep the hub cool. I see people all the time with these big brake hoses pointing right at the caliper. It's great keeping the caliper cool, but the other thing is you can keep the pads too cool. The pads need heat to work. If you have one of these cars, every time you hit the brake pedal and the car runs around and squeals and makes all kinds of god-awful noise, believe me, it's not the brake pad, it's not the rotor, it's that you're not driving it hard enough to get it hot enough to work correctly. You have the wrong pad for the wrong application and you're not using the car correctly. That is what happens. Now we're going to go into mounting our brake bracket on the back and setting up our caliper and measuring the distance on the caliper to ensure correct pad engagement. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn this thing around and we're going to install our brake bracket. Now I'm going to slide this out of the way because there are probably 20 different brake brackets as well. I get asked more questions about this stuff right here than anything else, and that is brake brackets. These are a bolt-on radial mount for a caliper. This is our 6-piston Brembo caliper that's going on our car. And if you can see right here on top, it's got a radial mount. These slide in and lock the caliper to the back of our spindle right there. Right there. So I get a lot of questions about these, and there seems to be a lot of misleading information. Just about every specific caliper has a bracket made for itself, whether it's Pro Systems, Alcon, AP. If you look at a lot of these, a lot of the brackets that are made will not cross over to other stuff. There is one exception. If you find a lot of the Pro Systems stuff, I'm not knocking Pro Systems, but 9 out of 10 times it's a direct copy or knockoff of Brembo. If you look at the Brembo bracket and you look at that one, the only thing different, you see how it's not scalloped here, it's flat across the top. It's scalloped here, just like the Brembo. Pattern is the same, bolt pattern is exactly the same. It's the same bracket, just made by Brembo here and Pro Systems here. These brackets come in different sizes. These are for a 6-piston, these are for a 4-piston, these are for Brembo. This is a Pro System knockoff of that Brembo. This is a Ray Bestis Alcon. If you get Ray Bestis brakes for a NASCAR, it's all made by Alcon. So Alcon and Ray Bestis stuff will cross over. If you see a CP number on it, it's going to be for AP. This is an AP front. This little tiny thing is for a rear. Something else to get into. These are standard brackets. These are offset brackets. They make them. They make them for different applications and different rotors. Reason being, this one bolts on here, slides right in, works like a champ. But if you had an AP with an offset bracket, let's pull this out. Come on now. We'll pull that out. We have this AP that's offset. It'll fit in the hole, but it's way off. The reason being, there are different offsets for AP calipers as well. This may not work for a Brembo. This may not work for our application. The studs are too small and it's sloppy in there. But on an AP, that offset might be back here. So it just depends on where these bosses are located on the caliper as well. So we're going to set all this stuff aside and we're going to install our brackets on that spindle. Now we have our completed spindle assembly sitting on our lower ball joint stud. I use Moog billet ball joints for everything that I have. This is our front suspension assembly. I've replaced a lot of things. We've got Gibbs upper spring perches, lower spring helix, got a brand new, right out of the box, already been rated by my buddy Carl. Put these in the machine, smashed them, checked them for me. These are Draco springs. We've got a mock-up shock on here to hold everything up, and we've got some mock-up bolts in here to check fitment for our lower sway bar arm. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to torque this in place. I don't like using cotter pins in these. I've seen people use a cotter pin 4 inches long and smash it all around and it just looks like shit. I like to use what's called a diaper pin. Several places sell these. You can get an SRI, All-Star. I go from the front to the back and lock it in place. Like I said, the only thing this does, just like safety wire, is if this loosens up, it helps prevent it from turning any more than it already does. And in one way that it does that, if it actually gets any force to where it breaks this off, this usually lodges within the thread, galls it, and the bolt can't remove any further. What I'm going to do now is install the right side hub assembly with the caliper, spindle, and rotor on it. And then we're going to put the upper control arms on it, and we're going to sit it on ride height blocks. One thing that you also want to check is to make sure that your ball joint through rotation does not touch the back of your rotor. As you can see right here, we have plenty of clearance. If this actually touches the rotor and causes interference, you're going to have major problems right there with brake drag and destroying the rotor. So now is a good time to check it. That's where the hat and the caliper mount play a big part of your assembly. Welcome back, my friends. As you can see, some major changes have taken place in the Supra since the last video piece that you saw when we put the front spindle on. Complete front suspension is on other than the tie rods. We're going to build those now and we're going to install them. After that, we're going to sit it on the ground. The car's completely plumbed now except for the front brake lines. They're going to go on after I receive a new set of AMIC front spindle tethers. We're going to put those on as well. The front suspension, I've installed the upper control arms, springs, spring cups, slugs, you name it, ball joints. I use Moog billet ball joints, upper and lower. We're going to use Moog billet tie rod ends as well. We're going to get the car sitting on the ground. At the front, we're going at 2 3/4 at the front valence. Back here, we're going to be right at 3 3/4, close to 4 inches. Once we get it on the ground and see where it settles, we'll know for sure. The setup that's in the front end right now is kind of just a baseline setup. It's not permanent. I've got it pretty close to where I want it to be with the angle finder on the upper control arm and lower control arm angles and the caster camber gauge. It's not permanent. Once I get it sitting on a surface plate, we'll run through it again with the turn plates and we'll see where everything's at. We'll do a final pull down on it and see where our numbers land. Right now, the height that I've got it at is right where I want it. I'm not afraid to let the rough side drag. If you've seen my truck, you understand what I'm talking about. So we're going to build the tie rods, get them put on. Hopefully by the end of this video, spindle tethers come in today. If they do, I'll run to Mooresville and get them and we'll put them on and we'll set this thing on the ground. So let's jump into it. So this is the mock-up inner tie rod that was on our car that it rolled around with. It's an interesting piece the way they put it together, and I'm not exactly sure why they did. Our inner tie rod is one of these old school Moog problem solvers. They are stiff as shit and they hardly work. And now here we've got a low friction Howell ball joint, a Ronnie Hopkins adjuster, and then a no-name sleeve in the middle. All of this stuff is going to be replaced. So we're going to go at Victory Performance Parts, and Victory is literally like, I don't know, maybe a half a mile from Ronnie Hopkins' old shop in Duncan, South Carolina. And Victory makes all of these parts for several companies, and they make them privately for themselves. If you look at it, this is the same adjuster as the Hopkins. Victory made slugs. They made all of the slugs, center links, steering support rods, the nuts that go on the ball joints on the end. If you got one of these that says RHE, it's a Hopkins. It came from Victory Performance. We're going to replace everything. These old ball joints, we're going to go with Moog MP2001s. These are the billets. I like these. And then with your inner rod with the jam nut on it, this is an MP2001. These are all standard length. Don't forget to clock your Zerk fitting out so you can service it. A lot of cars, depending on the triangle brace underneath the car, you can't get a grease gun underneath it. And half the time you can't get one from the top. So face it pointing out along the length of the tie rod. We're going to replace everything there. We have grade 8 Bowman and Lawson hardware. We're going to get all this done. We got bump slugs from Hopkins and MPD. We're going to go through and do that as well. So let's move this out of the way and let's get all of this bolted together and we'll get our car put together. So I'll throw our adjuster sleeve on here. You gotta remember, we're going for a total length of 16 inches. So as you can see in the groove here, you can see how far this threads in. By a rule of thumb with all of this stuff, and I've seen people tear this shit up pretty bad, one of the rules of thumb that you want to see, you have the shank diameter. This is the shank diameter of the tie rod. At a minimum, the length that you want in there is the width and diameter of that. So if that's the diameter of our tie rod shank, you want at least that much in there before you put a jam nut on it and you lock it in place. Just remember that. I see a lot of people mess that up. So with this, we're going in to the edge of the back of the threads here. I can see it through the top. And then we'll get our 16-inch overall length in total for this piece. So we'll stop there. We'll stick our inner on here. Thread everything together. Now you have to remember as well, these ball joints, I'm sorry, I keep calling them ball joints for some fucking reason. They're tie rod ends. One is a left-handed thread, one is a right-handed. And they do not thread in the same holes the same way. And like I said, you're only locking this one in with a jam nut. Out here at the wheel and tire, you're not going to need that. And as you can see, this one is a left-handed thread. Why is that? Well, you need to have opposing threads, especially out here at the adjuster, when you want to go and adjust toe and your bump steer in your car. So the tie rods are installed and this hot rod is sitting on the ground. I've got my left side, which would be your right side, actually in the car. As you can see, we've got the Victory adjuster on it right there. Brand new tie rods, Victory Performance hardware, Draco spring. Inner tie rod is set as well. Down here on our TRD center link. Left side is set as well. Now, as I said before, there's no safety wire in here. These are not torqued to spec yet. This is loosely set. These also, when I get it to the shop, these will be cut off, put in the lathe and trimmed down to one thread past the end of the adjustment bolt. Brake lines are on, shocks are in, motor is set. Up next is wiring. As you can see, there's no plugs or anything. I'll put a Deutsch connector on the end of the fan, put it on a relay, have that set. Plug wires are coming from Brian Scott. Intake and carburetor will go on next. I've already put the transducers on the firewall, and we're going to run Deutsch connectors throughout the entire car. As you can see, we've got blue PMU pads in there. Moog upper ball joints. Upper control arm angles are set roughly right now. This side is 24.5 and that side is 25.1. That's within 0.6 of a degree. But like I said, once we get ride height set, we start playing around with bump slugs, we start playing around with caster slugs. That's going to get adjusted some. I did set the seat in it. Up next are seat rails as well. And I started playing with the dash and some of the layout of the wiring. As you can see, it sits pretty low. I'm pretty happy with it. Over here on the bench, we've got carbon ductwork. All that's got to go in the car. NACA ducts got to go in the windows. I like the new scalloped ones. The car currently has the scalloped NACA duct in it. So we're going to add 2 more on each side, put 3 in each window. My actual spindle tethers came today. I've got the other 2 sitting outside. They've been heat shrinked and wrapped, and they're going to go on the car, but this is for the other side. I've got to do that. Here's all of our camber adjustment spacers. I like using, when I go to set my caster, moving the control arm forward and backwards on the car, I like using the threaded insert and just using a half nut as a safety. I enjoy using those. They work very well. It's just another level of security when putting your car together. Like I said, you can use the ones that do not have the thread in it. But like I said, me personally, I like the threaded ones for added security. When it comes to basic wiring in the car, we're gonna go with 1 MSD ignition box, HVC. I like this box because you can put the rev limiter in the end of it. You don't need an extra rev limiter box. Got our HVC coil. I'm going with Deutsch connectors. So I'm gonna use this style for my sensors. This is gonna be a 4-pin for my temperature probes. And then I have to trim it here with my Dremel, as you can see. And we're gonna put a 6-pin in for our pressure transducers. On the back, I'll use black epoxy, have them set in place so they can't pull in and out. And we'll mount this on our firewall. Also got my Deutsch connector kit. I've had this for several years. It has everything in it from pin removal tools, male and female pins of all sizes, pressure transducers, regular Amphenol and regular Deutsch connector style kit. I also got HPD and HPMs, my pliers, all this stuff. This is everything you need to wire a car correctly. You can go with, you can have people that come out and do it for you, or you can try and learn and do it yourself. If I can make a helicopter fly for the military and it not fall out of the sky and kill anybody, I'm damn sure can wire a race car. So this is stuff we're going to use. I've also got new pigtails for my gauges. Some of this wiring I'm going to go through, some of it I'm going to use, some of the pigtails I'm going to cut off and save, some of the connectors I'm going to keep, and a vast majority of that's going to go in the garbage because we have new wire to wire the car all the way through. Some of these plugs, similar to this, I will reuse for our ignition box and for our coil. And then I've got multiple studs, positive and negative, so I can run a positive and negative power source underneath the dash rather than have to run 15 wires back to my disconnect switch. I like the 3-post switch. These are made by Brown and Miller. These are good switches. The big reason I like these more than the standard black 2-pin one, I mean, if you're running a street stock and you've got a regular alternator or something on it, a 2-pin like this will work fine. I like the 3-pin for several reasons. When I wire this in the car, my alternator is going to come into one plug, my battery is going to come into another, and then all of the accessories in the car are going to run off of a third. And when I turn the power off, that isolates the alternator from the power source, that isolates the battery from the alternator, and it isolates all 3 from each other, and the gauges and the ignition accessories will be isolated away from both of them as well. That's why I like a 3-pin. Brown & Miller makes these. You can buy them from Brown & Miller. There are several other companies that make them, but if you only got a 2-pin, you can make it work. Some people use a 2-pin like this, and they put an alternator disconnect in it also. That's a wrap on this video, guys. In post-production, looking at some of the edits and cuts, the portion where I was going through adjusting the brake caliper distance and the bracket on the spindle, for some reason I lost all the audio for that. It's just me making these videos. I don't have any help. I don't want any help. I don't really care for any help. I don't like other people following behind me. I don't have a baby mama or a little sister with a camera behind me doing all this crap. It's just me. So sometimes shit happens, and it happened. But I appreciate you guys watching the videos anyway. Crazy part is 97.8% of the 514,000 views I've received That percentage, 97% of you, aren't even subscribed. I find that crazy. Tells me the haters are even watching. But it is what it is. I'm going to jump on a few questions real quick. First is going to be from Mike Kenyon, 3322. Might I suggest the pressure from the pump go into the oil filter rather than through the oil cooler and plumb to the bottom of the cooler out to the filter? I have good success with this method. Actually, the method that this engine is plumbed with is the way that Toyota prefers it. So you may not be able to see it in the way that it's plumbed, in the way that I've plumbed things. This car has 5 different filters in it. So you have a filter coming out of the tank into the hardline. That's number 1. That goes into the pressure source of the pump. From that, it goes into the oil cooler. Cool oil goes into the filter. That is filter number 2. The reason we do it that way through the filter and into that one is because that's a paper cartridge element. Cooler oil means less degradation on the filter. Then it goes into the engine. In the pan, there's actually 3 filters in the pan on each scavenge section that filter oil back into the pump. Once it leaves the pump, it goes back to the tank to another filter, which is actually 6. So the oil in this engine has actually gone through 6 different filters throughout the entire system. So that helps you isolate where your problem may be and where all the particles in the engine are if it fails. So we have a rocker arm fail, push rod, bearing comes apart, you'll be able to see it. Especially the larger pieces will stay in the pan before they get to the pump and destroy it. Anything smaller that gets behind that will go through an undercar filter before it gets back into the tank. So I appreciate your input. Hey, if that works for you, man, keep going and keep digging with it. I appreciate it. Up next, Chris Matthews, loving the level of detail. Question, what's the snack situation like in the garage? Do you have a bench or cabinet full of stuff that says not candy but is in fact completely full? Honestly, no, I don't keep any food in the garage. I do have a refrigerator over there that came out of my house, and I'll show you what's in it. We remodeled our kitchen. About a year ago. So the Frigidaire that was in the house got pulled out of the house and put in the garage. And we have coconut water, vitamin water, regular water. That's it. So that's the snack situation, guys. Nothing crazy, nothing wild. About 200 yards that way is my house, and my other building is about 300 yards that way. If I want something to eat, I'll just walk to the house and get it. The other question I get asked a lot too is it Budweiser, Busch, or any of that? I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do energy drinks, I don't do that crap. I don't eat a bunch of junk food, I'm not into that, or sodas. I try and eat as healthy as I can, especially since the whole colon cancer episode. So that changed my life quite a bit. But that's what you see, that's what you get. Up next, Gary LRKILK. He asked, what is the best way to verify a chassis number, or its history? The very simple way that I do it, and people that have gained a reputation, worked in the industry, and are known as vintage stock car restoration people, they go directly to the source. They go directly to crew chiefs, crew members, car builders, owners. They go to all those things. It's very simple. You go to the source. Facebook groups are the worst. I see this all the time. You see a guy take a picture of a chassis. I bought this car. I want to know about this chassis. Where they post it to 13 different fucked up Facebook groups that claim to be stock car restoration groups and stock car racing groups and all this shit, when in reality they do nothing more than put around parade laps with wet sump garbage. And that is not where you need to go to find the history of your car. It's unfortunate, but these groups are filled with people that play fucking their best Earl Scheib impersonation with a year one catalog on Papa's Bonneville. Or their paycheck and work shirt says City of Shitter Plant on it because they don't even live in the state they claim that fucking cars come from. Be leery. Ask yourself a few questions when you do this and you get a response from somebody. Ask them, ask yourself, where was that person prior to the global medical emergency pandemic of 2021? I can't say the C word, they get mad about that. Ask yourself, where were they at when that car was built? Because the likelihood is their mom was still laying out their school clothes. And that's just the truth, and I'm being honest. You know, you get a lot of people like that tell you, hey, you should question a car that's for sale. You should question people that restore stuff, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. And then they go to websites on the internet that tell you, well, it says right here on the internet, this chassis number is right. As you know, not everything on the internet is true. Not everybody on the internet is telling the truth, and people are the worst. People are the greatest and worst thing about the internet and history. So be leery of that. Be leery of that shit, because there are websites, there are these ultimate history racing sites and all this shit. Know this, from the time an entry blank is mailed into NASCAR back in the day, let's say it's 1998, they mail that thing into NASCAR, they get the entry blank, they're going to run car number 5. Well, by the time they get to load number 5 for that race, which that entry blank is mailed a month prior to, let's say they're going to run that car at Michigan. Well, they tear up the car that they were going to run at Michigan 3 weeks before. So they're going to run car number 9 instead of car number 5. They get car number 5 to the track. They crash car number 5 in practice. They got to pull car number 14 off the trailer, their backup car. And that's the car that runs the race. But the website that's getting all your information, that's telling you this is right, wrong, or indifferent, has car number 5 listed as the car that ran the race, when car number 14 is the one that actually entered the race. You know who knows that? The people that built the motherfucker. Not the internet experts that say this press release said it ran on this fucking date. Something else to think about. I hate that people take advantage of others on the internet and they think that you're stupid when you do that. If the person you're getting information from has to load their car up in a trailer and haul it to another state to have somebody else put a spoiler on it because they can't TIG weld jack shit, or put a nose on it, or put a hood on it and build a rear window plug because they don't know fuck all about metal fabrication or how to build a stock car because they've never worked in the industry, that ain't the motherfucker you need to be getting information from. I'm just saying. I'm kind of fed up with people getting the shit taken advantage of them and seeing other idiots talk shit about people that I know and work with who have built a reputation. If any of those words or things I've said offend you, I am sorry, but that's just the truth. It is what it is. Last but not least, this comes from Benjamin White. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, this paper's all torn up because I had shot the ending to this video one time before, and I was kind of frustrated with a lot of things. I wasn't even sure I was gonna make this video. I was just kind of delete this bullshit because I'll be honest with you, YouTube is not my source of income. I do this because I want people to have as much of the right basic information as I can. I'm not here to tell somebody's story and make money off their views and their story. I don't even give a shit about that. I don't give a shit about the income from it. I just want people to know what is right compared to all the bullshit you're fed on the internet. And every single day, the bane of any person's existence is social media. If social media is a big part of your life, you have no life. Once you turn this off and you put this down, nothing in there and those people don't exist. And people need to figure that out. And I figured that out a long time ago, and I cut a lot of those people out of my life and I don't fucking deal with them. And I continuously get hate because I have Toyota race cars in this building, and I have Toyota race cars in that building, and I have Toyota race cars in other places. I do have Chevrolets. This is a Chevrolet, that's a Chevrolet. People ask why do I keep them covered up? Why? Because half the time it's nobody's business what I have, what's for sale, and what isn't. If I leave covers off this, half the time I get messages, how much, how much, how much, from people that can't afford anything. I know people think I'm picking on them, but it's not true. I'm just tired of dealing with that. And then I get people that shit on posts that I have. That's my Denny Hamlin car. I bought this motherfucker straight from J.D. Gibbs. I love that car. People don't like Denny Hamlin. I don't give a shit. That's my race car. I like Denny Hamlin. I built that thing. It's a survivor. That car raced several times. When I got it, it was solid black chassis on casters with crushed panels and windows. I bought 4 different wrecked Joe Gibbs cars to build that car and put it back together correctly with the correct parts. I posted a picture of that car when we went to Chattanooga. And I get fucking words from it, some dipshit like this, that I shouldn't be posting a picture of my car because there's a picture of Dale Earnhardt's car in the background. I don't care. That's my car. I can post a fucking picture of it, whether it's a Toyota or not. And if you don't like it, change the fucking channel. Is what it is. All that shit pisses me off. And then I get messages like this. This is what makes it worth it. And I'm going to read it verbatim. This was from Benjamin Witt 5184. This is what he had to say. I understand your frustration with how filming makes everything 2 to 3 times longer than normal. However, your channel is a treasure trove of information. The time you spend on filming and editing is very good, and you do a damn good job. You're a subject matter expert and an excellent teacher. I've always wanted to see this kind of behind the scenes NASCAR builds by someone who's been there and done that. I'm a lifelong NASCAR fan and I love what you do, and I would love to hear more about your journey. He says in here something that kind of struck home, because at one time I felt I was in this place. He says, I know I am a nobody in a sea of nobodies, but you are somebody and do a damn good job. Here's the truth, Benjamin. Everybody is somebody. And the reality of it is, just because I bolt race cars together and English wheel panels and set up suspension and everything, it doesn't make me any better or worse than what you do. Every single person in this world has something to offer. Every single one of us does. Every single person in this world is a somebody. It's what you choose to do with your somebody that makes a difference. Some people choose to be the bane of the existence of others and shit all over them, and they're the trolls of the internet that have nothing to offer. Anything you have to offer, whether it's doing a damn good job bagging groceries or building race cars, or you spent time in the service, every single thing you've done is good. You do good things. There are good people in this world, and you're not a nobody. We're all somebody. I just got lucky enough as a kid. My dad road racing Pintos and Datsun 510s in the 70s to grow up in a racing family, around racing people, move to racing country, run into those people again, work in those jobs and teams, and get to have those experiences with those people. It doesn't make me any better. It just makes me more opportune. There's nothing in this world that stops anybody from working in the world of racing. The truth of the matter is, you have to sacrifice a lot if you really want to do it. There have been dozens and dozens of documented films and articles and interviews and stories told on shit like NASCAR Race Hub and stuff about, look how many times Dale Earnhardt's been married. His marriage just fell apart because he put racing in front of all that. For a long time, people thought that was cool. I never thought it was cool. There are a lot of people that put Dale Earnhardt way up here. Well, I met Dale Earnhardt back in the day. He was an okay guy, but Dale Earnhardt's not, I don't get it. It's one of those things I don't get. And if you're going to idolize somebody you know. That's another thing I get is, oh man, you know this guy, or I seen you hanging out with this person, or I seen you here, or, oh, can you get me this person's autograph, or I saw you at a commercial or a test doing this with somebody. You know what, man? Race car drivers, some of them can be really great people, and some of the ones that you think are really great are actually the biggest assholes behind the scene. And that's just the way it is. It's all like wrestling. It really is. The public persona you see of somebody being hated or disliked, or somebody being really liked or not liked, man, all of that is just a show. It really is. And a lot of the NASCAR drivers out there you think are great guys are not, and a lot of the ones you think are jerks on TV are actually the nicest guys you'll ever meet. I've learned that. I've also learned that a full-time job in racing anymore is not something that I want. Since we went to Talladega with the Davey Allison car and Doug Yates, I've had 4 job offers since then in April. Because race teams now, people get burned out. People come into this job and they go hard 2, 3, 4 years and they're like, man, I am done. And then there are people that stay around and you look at their resume and they've worked for 9, 10 different teams. Kind of like what just happened with Stuart Haas. You know, people are going to see that guy from Stuart Haas. One's going to be working at Gibbs. Some might be working at Hendrick. Some might land at 2311. Some might land at front row. You never know. But I've seen people look back on somebody that said, hey, I worked, same thing with me. Bill Davis, Michael Waltrip, Levine Family Racing, Go Fast here, there. Oh, MBV. Jesus, man, why you suck so bad? You got to go to all. No, it's not like that. Racing isn't like that. Just because you have 10 different fucking companies on your resume doesn't mean you're a bad fabricator. You can get along with people. Good teams fail, bad teams fail. People move around. And like when you see some of these during race day interviews, and you see people walking around wearing fire suits for this team or that team and this, doesn't mean they work for that team. Hendrick Motorsports farms out so many pit crew people on race day for different Chevrolet teams, you would be blown away if you knew how many people on race day worked for Hendrick Motorsports. I think it's kind of a conflict of interest. I don't like it, but all the major teams do it. Joe Gibbs farms people out. Hendrick farms people out. Roush farms people out. It happens. I've seen it. So if you've got this Chevrolet car out in front of you and you own this team and your core group of people are some of the guys that are on the B team pitting this car and they're out front and it falls behind and they leave a wheel loose or suddenly your car's out front, I don't think that's right. I've seen it. People in the industry see it and it's kind of crazy. So Matthew, I appreciate your compliments. I probably will keep going with this, at least until that car's finished. I always follow through with something. Sorry I got heated in this, and sorry about the language in this, but it is what it is. I appreciate every single one of you taking the time to watch these videos. I'm just a regular guy. I served 24 years in the service, got to know a lot of great people working on race cars and serving at the same time. I've enjoyed it along the way. I know a lot of great people. I got to meet a lot of great people, and there's a lot of assholes in this world too. Don't be one of those people. Thank you guys. Like, subscribe, and comment. I appreciate it. Including the 97% of you that are haters that don't subscribe. I appreciate you too. See you again soon.